Christmas Eve horror, the tenant, and the nursing nightmare. When I was younger, my family always hosted Christmas. We lived on the upper level of a two-family house that my parents owned. The lower level was rented to tenants, and over the years, we had a revolving door of people come and go. Christmas in our household was always lively, a warm tradition filled with food, laughter, and the comforting chaos of extended family. In December 2012, just weeks before Christmas, a new tenant moved in downstairs. He was a man in his 30s, quiet and unassuming. My parents thought they had hit the jackpot, a tenant who wouldn't cause any trouble. At least, that's what they thought. But shortly after he moved in, things started to feel off. At first, it was little things, unusual noises late at night, like the sound of the front door opening and closing repeatedly, and the occasional muffled voices. Then, the disturbances escalated. Some nights, we'd hear shouting, though the words were indistinguishable. It was enough to keep my dad awake, and one night, he went downstairs to talk to the tenant. When my dad came back upstairs, he looked unsettled. I asked what happened, but he brushed it off. "Just asked him to keep it down," he said curtly. Yet, the look in his eyes hinted that he felt something wasn't quite right about the man. A Christmas Eve to remember Christmas Eve arrived in a whirl of activity. The dining table was extended to its fullest length to fit everyone, 20 family members in total. The air smelled of roasted turkey, sweet pies, and cinnamon-scented candles. Laughter and conversation filled the room, and for a while, all thoughts of the tenant were forgotten. My Uncle Jake, a heavy smoker, stepped outside frequently for cigarette breaks. After our main course, Jake's phone, a battered flip phone he swore by, started ringing on the table. My dad, not wanting the sound to disrupt the meal, handed it to me. "Take this to your uncle, will you? He's probably out back," he said. I grabbed the phone and hurried downstairs. As I reached the bottom of the stairs, something caught my eye. The back door, which led to the yard, was slightly ajar. A cold draft slipped through the opening, and for a moment, I hesitated. "Uncle Jake?" I called out, but there was no response. I figured he had gone out the back door to smoke. The phone was still ringing, so I stepped outside, shivering as the winter air bit at my skin. Snow covered the ground, crunching softly under my feet as I approached the backyard. The yard was dark, but the faint glow of the house lights illuminated a shed in the corner. As I walked closer, I noticed the shed door was open slightly. Then, I heard movement inside, a faint shuffling sound. "Uncle Jake, are you in there?" I called out again, louder this time. For a moment, there was silence. Then, someone emerged from the shed. The figure walked toward me briskly, and at first, I assumed it was my uncle, hurrying to grab his phone before the call ended. But as the figure stepped into the light, I froze. It wasn't Jake. It was the tenant. His face was expressionless, but his sudden approach felt wrong, too aggressive. My instincts screamed at me to run. Without thinking, I turned and sprinted back to the house, slamming the door behind me. My heart pounded as I locked the door and pressed my back against it, trying to catch my breath. I found Uncle Jake in the front yard, smoking as if nothing had happened. "Your phone," I said, handing it to him with trembling hands. "What's wrong with you? You look like you've seen a ghost," he joked, but I wasn't in the mood. "The tenant. He was in the shed," I stammered. "He came at me." Jake frowned but shrugged. "Probably just checking something out. Don't worry about it." I stayed outside with him, unwilling to go back inside alone. When we finally returned to the dining room, I told my dad about what happened. His face darkened, but he didn't say much. He waited until dinner was over, and most of the guests had left before checking outside. When he came back, he reported that the shed was shut and the tenant wouldn't answer his door. The late-night intruder that night, as the house settled into silence, I stayed up in the living room, basking in the glow of the Christmas tree and the warmth of the fire. The soft crackle of the flames and the faint hum of a Christmas movie playing on TV made me feel safe. I didn't want to think about the tenant or the shed. At some point, I must have dozed off. I woke up to a faint creaking noise, the sound of someone on the stairs. Half asleep, I assumed it was one of my parents or my sister. The Christmas tree blocked my view of the stairs, so I didn't bother to check. The creaking stopped, and the house fell silent again. I closed my eyes, letting the warmth of the fire lull me back into sleep. Then, I heard a rustling sound near the tree. It was subtle, like an ornament being brushed against. My eyes snapped open, and I turned my head toward the tree. It stood still, its lights twinkling innocently. Probably the heat from the fire, I told myself, trying to brush off my unease. But then I felt a presence. Someone was standing over me. I flipped onto my side and came face to face with the tenant. He was bending slightly, his face mere inches from mine. For a moment, I couldn't move. My brain struggled to process what I was seeing. Then, instinct took over, and I screamed a loud, piercing sound that shattered the silence of the house. The man lunged forward, trying to cover my mouth, but I screamed again, louder this time. My dad burst out of his room, yelling, "What's going on?" The tenant bolted, racing for the stairs. My dad chased after him, but by the time he reached the front door, the tenant was already driving away. The aftermath: the next morning, my parents contacted the police and filed a report. Thankfully, they had copies of the tenant's ID and rental agreement. With this evidence, they sued him for breaking and entering. The case was open and shut, but it didn't erase the fear that had taken root in our home. For weeks, I couldn't sleep without double-checking the locks and peeking out the windows. Christmas, once my favorite time of year, now carried a shadow of unease. A chilling nursing shift years later, in 2015, I was working as a psychiatric nurse. On Christmas Eve, I was scheduled for an overnight shift. The hospital was quiet, dimly lit, and decorated with cheerful Christmas lights that did little to brighten the eerie atmosphere of the night. One patient, an elderly woman named Bertha, always unsettled me. She had severe schizophrenia and often mumbled to herself. Sometimes, she would look directly at me and laugh, as if sharing a private joke with an invisible companion. Around 3 o'clock, I went to check on her. She was awake, staring at the ceiling with a vacant smile. "Bertha, do you need anything?" I asked gently. She turned her head slowly, fixing me with her unsettling gaze. "He's here," she whispered, her lips curling into a smile. "Who's here?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. She laughed, a low, raspy sound that sent chills down my spine. "He's behind you." I froze. My breath caught as I felt the hairs on the back of my neck rise. Slowly, I turned to look behind me, but the hallway was empty. When I turned back, Bertha was still smiling, her laughter growing louder. I backed out of the room, my heart racing, and spent the rest of the night feeling as though someone or something was watching me. Reflection: both experiences taught me that danger often lurks where you least expect it, in the quiet tenant downstairs or the shadowed corners of a hospital room. Christmas, once a season of joy, became a reminder of how close we sometimes come to the darkness. The night I'll never forget. A Christmas horror story. Last Christmas, I had an idea I thought was perfect: cutting down our own tree. It was our first Christmas in the new apartment, and I wanted it to feel special. My girlfriend, Tristan, was less enthusiastic, but I figured the experience would win her over. We lived in New Hampshire, surrounded by beautiful spruce trees, so finding one seemed like the ideal festive activity. I packed up a few essentials: gloves, a flashlight, and an old axe. As we drove toward the woods, snow started falling softly. The flakes caught in the headlights, giving the night a magical, almost surreal quality. I glanced at Tristan. She stared out the window, her breath fogging up the glass. I could tell she wasn't thrilled, but I reassured her, "This will be fun. You'll see." We parked in a small clearing on the side of a quiet road. The crunch of gravel beneath the tires was the only sound in the stillness of the evening. As we stepped out, the cold air hit us like a wall. Tristan zipped her coat tighter and muttered something about how we could have just gone to Home Depot like normal people. "Where's the fun in that?" I joked, trying to keep the mood light. We started our hike uphill, the snow growing deeper with every step. The forest was quiet, save for the occasional rustle of branches in the wind. It was peaceful at first, but as the light faded, the silence became oppressive. The tall pine trees loomed over us, their dark forms blending into the night sky. "Are we there yet?" Tristan asked, her voice cutting through the quiet. "Almost," I lied, scanning the trees for the perfect one. Finally, we found a spruce tree just the right size to fit in our living room. Its branches were dusted with snow, and it looked like something straight out of a holiday postcard. "This is it," I said, patting the tree trunk. Tristan crossed her arms. "Great, let's hurry up, it's freezing." I set to work, raising the axe and bringing it down against the trunk. The sound echoed through the forest with every swing, breaking the eerie stillness. Tristan stood off to the side, rubbing her arms for warmth. After several swings, the tree toppled over with a satisfying crunch. "Got it," I announced, proud of my handiwork. "Good. Let's go," Tristan replied, already turning back toward the hill. "Hold on. We have to carry it together. Grab the top end." She frowned. "I don't have gloves. My hands will freeze." I sighed, realizing she'd left her gloves in the truck. "Fine. Here, take the keys and grab the extra pair from the glove box. I'll wait here." Tristan took the keys and trudged back down the hill, leaving me alone with the tree. I sat down on the trunk, catching my breath and taking in the surroundings. The snow was falling heavier now, and the forest was almost completely dark. I turned on my flashlight, casting a beam of light through the trees. The silence was unnerving. The only sounds were the soft patter of snow and the occasional creak of a branch. It felt like the woods were holding their breath. Minutes passed. Tristan was taking longer than expected. I stood up, shining the flashlight in the direction she'd gone. "Tristan?" I called out. No answer. Then I heard the crunch of boots on snow. Relief washed over me. "About time," I yelled, waving the flashlight. The footsteps stopped. "Tristan?" I called again, a knot forming in my stomach. There was no response, only silence. I convinced myself she was trying to mess with me, so I decided to turn the tables. I set the flashlight down on the stump, its beam illuminating the area, and crept into the shadows. My plan was to hide behind a tree and surprise her when she got closer. I crouched behind a large pine, barely breathing. The footsteps started again, slower this time, as if whoever it was carefully approaching. My heart pounded in my chest. The steps grew louder, closer. Finally, a figure emerged into the beam of the flashlight. It wasn't Tristan. A man, dressed in a heavy coat with the hood pulled up, stood where the flashlight lay. He bent down, picked it up, and turned it off. Darkness swallowed the woods. My breath caught in my throat. I crouched lower, my mind racing. Who was this guy? And why was he out here in the middle of nowhere? I decided I wasn't going to stick around to find out. I took a deep breath and bolted down the hill, the sound of my boots crunching through the snow shattering the silence. I didn't dare look back. Halfway down, I heard a sound that froze me in my tracks. Tristan's voice, screaming my name. "Tristan!" I shouted, panic surging through me. I pushed myself to run faster, nearly slipping on the icy slope. When I reached the bottom, I saw the truck. The headlights were on, and the horn was blaring. Tristan was inside, frantically waving for me to hurry. I flung the door open and jumped into the driver's seat. "What happened?" I demanded. "Just drive," she screamed. I didn't need to be told twice. I slammed the truck into reverse, spinning the tires as I backed out of the clearing. As I shifted into drive and sped down the road, we both looked back. The man was standing at the edge of the clearing, watching us. Neither of us spoke for a long time. The drive back to town felt endless, the tension in the cab suffocating. Tristan was shaking, her face pale. "What happened?" I finally asked, breaking the silence. "When I got to the truck, I felt like someone was watching me," she said, her voice trembling. I turned around, and he was standing at the edge of the woods, just staring. Then he started walking toward me, so I jumped in the truck and locked the doors. I honked the horn to get your attention. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, my knuckles white. "Who the hell was he?" Tristan shook her head. "I don't know, but let's never do this again." When we finally got home, the warmth of the apartment felt like a blessing. We didn't say much as we sat on the couch, still shaken from the experience. The next day, we went to Home Depot and bought a pre-cut tree. As we decorated it that evening, neither of us mentioned the woods. To this day, I can't shake the image of that man charging out of the darkness, and I'll never forget the look in his eyes as he stood in the clearing, watching us drive away. Never again will I try to cut down my own Christmas tree.